To those not already in the know, when it comes to games and really media in general, atmosphere can be an incredibly important factor to my enjoyment of that media. Movies like Blade Runner, for instance, at least in my opinion, are a very flawed work of art, but underneath all those little niggles of annoyance in terms of the execution, the vibes of the movie are what elevate it to a level that place it firmly in one of my favorite films. There is something to be said about the heavy melancholy of the world that the alternate 2019 cyber future that makes me want to return to it over and over again. The screen radiates the steam and the fog of that city and seems to come into the room itself, and you can almost feel the wet of the rain touching your skin. If you close your eyes and listen to the sounds of the city, you can almost expect that when you open your eyes, you'll find yourself inside the streets of that first cyberpunk city. And that's where I think Ghost Song can awaken from its slumber. A new Metroidvania that's been worked on laboriously with love for nearly a decade by essentially one person, Matt White. Super Metroid is a game that firmly cemented the style of the Metroidvania genre as we know it and has essentially been unchanged for 30 years?
All around me are familiar faces.
And while you would probably think that just making like a big map that's constantly gatekept by a series of steadily unlockable abilities that open the map up bit by bit would theoretically be one of the easier functions of game design to nail, I think that getting a genuinely good entry in the genre is one of the more difficult things to do. There have been plenty of really great games since the release of Super Metroid, but I think unless the game is like a Hollow Knight or like a Blasphemous or, I don't know, an Ori in the Blind Forest, it's pretty hard for me to stick with them until the end. There is a natural sense of progression. Constantly unlocking things being the main driving force of the game design means that the little lizard part of your brain that gets addicted to games like Candy Crush ends up being hit not only as frequent as a bump of cocaine on a late night party, but each of those hits is a crucial and significant chapter of the game that you're playing. So despite being lost for bundles at a time ad nauseum, whenever you get that next item that opens up more of the map to you, the game naturally hooks you back into it. One of the biggest issues that I see with most Metroidvanias is that it's one of those genres that is kind of a struggle to come back to after having left it alone for a while. Despite the aforementioned consistent bump of endorphins, that can all deflate faster than an air mattress at the end of an Airbnb stay when you come back to it after a while and stare at the map having no idea what you're doing. A lot more recent games in the genre tend to fix this problem by having optional markers in the map, and while that can for sure help, it doesn't stop that initial feeling of being lost in a mess of labyrinths. Using the Blade Runner analogy again, I would say that Ghost Song is very much a Blade Runner of the Metroidvania genre. It has some things that just get in the way of it of being truly great, but there is something about Ghost Song's soul that truly does elevate it to something really special that I think every fan of the genre should play. Ghost Song opens about as somber as the rest of the entire game. A small flash of text, a whiz through the cosmos, and a zoom fade in to your character, the Deadsuit, lying motionless on the ground, surrounded by strange little alien animals. Forcing interaction right out of the gate, you can't move at all until you move the thumbstick, and with that, you breathe life into the Deadsuit and you may begin your journey. As far as a traditional Metroidvania, Ghost Song has very little in terms of what I would call immediate innovation. It hits all of the classic and more modern hallmarks. Big unfolding map, separated by unique biomes and a range of items that you have to find and utilize to further progress. As well as more emphasis on a story and characters that help push you to beat the game and in this case, save this assorted motley crew of stranded humans on this desolate planet. But the things that make Ghost Song stand out from among the pack are its more subtle mechanics, themes, and atmosphere. The first, and in my opinion, single coolest thing that Ghost Song implements is a twist on the traditional Metroid-esque blaster. Whereas most games allow you to blast away with little to no repercussions, Ghost Song adds a heating mechanic to your gun. The more you shoot at once, the slower and weaker your shots will become, and your blaster will start to glow a heated red. What makes this mechanic so ingenious, however, is that you also have a melee attack that you can seamlessly integrate into your shooting and switch up damage numbers, and when your weapon is overheating, your melee attacks is increased dramatically. So what could have just been a fun interlinking combat mechanic becomes a strategic give and take that forces you into combat. It's a pretty brilliant little idea that I think is expanded on as much as it needs to be, with secondary weapons that you'll find strewn about the world, such as a huge fist to punch shit, cool Rygar-esque circular saw, and my favorite, a huge sword that has a slow swing speed. All of these have defining positive and negative traits that make finding your preferred weapon interesting, but it can be possible to not even find the one that really suits your playstyle or build very much. For instance, I didn't find the circular saw until my second run through of the game. As far as the enemies that you'll be fighting in Ghost Song, they range from your traditional Metroid-esque strange little alien animals to more Souls-esque style creatures and all kinds of stuff in between. You'll find strange humanoid alien fodder, very Half-Life-esque four-legged parasitic creatures that have attached themselves to others, seemingly other Deadsuits, or at least what appears to be robotic humanoids, gigantic monstrosities, and much more. The boss encounters of Ghost Song, very much like its Dark Souls inspiration, is the key ingredient that keeps its momentum of combat going. Most of the game's bosses are just bigger enemies with much larger health bars, but some of the fights in particular feel really daunting, like giant enemies that take up a majority of the screen, and so much so that the game has to pull back the camera a bit so you can attack accordingly. The combat, however, isn't really Ghost Song's strongest aspect, as it falls into what I call the Sultan Sanctuary problem. And what I mean by that is that the game's combat is somewhat held back by the fact that it's a 2D action game. The combat in both Ghost Song and Sultan Sanctuary want to feel more depthful, more akin to the Dark Souls inspiration that they're obviously wearing on their sleeve. But they can never really muster much more than a simple dash attack that leaves the only option for a defensive maneuver to essentially dodge out behind the enemies as you fight them. When comparing Ghost Song and even Sultan Sanctuary to a game like Blasphemous, for instance, Blasphemous is also limited to the 2D plane, and the game by default is forced to leave you dodging in the same way that Ghost Song forces you. But the combat of Blasphemous is incredibly diverse, which allows it to lean into its blatant Souls-like influence to much greater effect than Ghost Song or Sultan Sanctuary. In Blasphemous, you can dash stab, attack from above, parry attacks, and more. There are more things than that to prevent it from feeling like a pretty generic Souls-like inspired game, but for the sake of fairness to Ghost Song, I'll stop there. Ghost Song, like I said, has the variety of its melee attacks to intersperse with its shooting mechanics, alongside the brilliant heating mechanic, but I can't say with any honesty that it feels anything more than functional. The game can try its best to compensate that by having some enemies deal with both sides for an attack and recovery, or just making the entire screen be filled with enemies. But none of these solutions feel either all that well designed or all that fair. Most of the enemy encounters devolve to shooting from a distance, dodging from an attack, and then meleeing until they're dead. But the game's combat feels best when it doesn't try to be a Souls-inspired shooter, but instead leans heavier into its Metroid roots. Exploring caverns and encountering an alien at a time, or the occasional expertly designed rooms where the enemy placement does end up working in both the player's and the designer's favor. As you defeat enemies, as well as finding lost, forgotten corpses of androids among the world of Ghost Song, you'll collect these little green wisps called nanogel, and it essentially works as a direct parallel to Dark Souls' souls. These are used to buy specific items and upgrades, but they're mainly used to level up at specific checkpoints. The level up system is pretty minimal, as you only get 3 options to choose from that all each affect their own unique properties for your stats. Vigor fills out your HP, the individual Vigor stat which affects your melee damage, and your power capacity, which I will get to later. Resolve is probably the overall best stat to dump into, as it affects the most categories, but it noticeably doesn't have any impact on your main weapon, which is what the third category focuses on. Gunpowder specifically focuses on the power of your suit, the power of your standard blaster, as well as the aforementioned power capacity of your suit, which affects the amount of modules that you can fit inside the Deadsuit. Just like Hollow Knight's badges, these modules that you get for your suit are slight tweaks to the Deadsuit's defenses, attacks, and other little middling or drastic changes, such as being able to see enemies' HP, reducing the heat buildup of your blaster cannon, increasing environmental damage at a cost, adding a lifesteal effect to melee attacks, and also increasing melee damage. These all provide a fun little bonus minigame of sorts that can enhance your experience with the game, allowing for very slight builds that you can strive for. The range of this is varied enough that you can tweak the game to your specific playstyle, but it's about as depthful as the level up mechanic is. Functional, fun, but nothing really more than that. There are also blaster modules that can provide different methods of attacks, such as like a standard missile launcher, plasma cannon, and an ice beam. The thing though is, while I thought that these would be used to access new locations like in Metroid, that instance only really comes up a very few amount of times in the game. The weapons mainly exist to provide different elemental effect damages and oddball features, like a little ball that shoots a bunch of bullets and weird little goo creatures. As far as I can tell, the blaster modules are mostly for experimentation. In my playthroughs, I focused mainly on the plasma cannon because it shot incredibly fast and had a tendency to just melt through things. But the fact that experimentation is sort of a subgenre in the blaster modules does provide a lot of possibilities for these builds to be super effective, which I think is good. But what makes a Metroidvania truly a Metroidvania is the exploration. But this leads to one final thing that I don't think Ghost Song nails. It gets right, but I don't think it nails. It's like a bent nail, but not that bad. Ghost Song's biggest strength in terms of its pure Metroidvania roots is the way that the game works on the core tenets of the genre. It's filled with all kinds of secrets and breakable walls, it's got a big map, but it never really feels like you're losing momentum, which is a pretty grand accomplishment. It's a shorter game, averaging around 5 to 6 to maybe 8 hours, which means the game leans towards this momentum already, but you essentially have the game's final goal laid out for you within the first hour of playing. And then you have a pretty clear path to all of these locations for the ship parts that you need, and once you get those, it's pretty much the end of the game. Sure, there's a final boss and cutscene, but you never once lose the pacing of the game, except for occasionally trying to run towards a ship piece that is gated behind an item that you currently don't have. But I mean, Metroidvania! The thing that gets in the way of the nail planting straight through the wood, in my opinion, is the way that the game decides to utilize its layout. You save in all of these little plant locations on the map, which are scattered everywhere, but you can only teleport from these specific robot carcasses. And how Ghost Song manages to make this bit kind of annoying is because of two things. The first teleporting room that you find is gatekept from essentially the rest of the map, especially early on in the game, by this door that you can't open until a certain point in the game. And I'm going to be honest, I played through this game twice, and both times I couldn't figure out how to open it. So the hallway that this door is blocking makes traveling to the actual center of the map an annoying venture down and around, up and around, every single time you want to get to the right side of the map from this location. The other thing that really got on my nerves is the placement of one of the teleporters in particular. You see this area of the map? You see how these two teleporters are right next to each other? You see that spot way over here? You see how there's 0? This is such a bizarre decision. It makes going to and from that area of the game a genuine slog. Graphically speaking, Ghost Song is aesthetically beautiful. It has a sharp, clear art style that obviously owes a lot to its Metroid brethren, but it feels refined, updated, and wonderfully focused. The light from the surface that shines through the cracks above you only eke out as if straining against the earth itself, illuminating corpses, crashed ships long forgotten, and items that have been left to rust in the world around you. As you push further into the planet, you discover parasitic wastelands, hued with a yellow that goes out of its way to eschew the view that you normally have towards the color psychologically. What normally represents happiness, hope, and creativity is replaced with an unsettling fear that creeps and crawls under your skin like the parasites have done with the planet itself. Ghost Song frequently lingers in darkness, wispy tendrils of fauna, and spacious chasms that reside inside the world, and it gives the game a very damper atmosphere. It feels like you can almost feel the cold dampness pouring off of the stalactites of the caves and the brushing of the plants against your leg as you traverse the world of Ghost Song. It invokes the sense of exploring somewhere otherworldly that is as beautiful as it is dangerous. The music of Ghost Song, however, is on another level all its own. The spacious, post-Rocky prog-tinned OST for Ghost Song is honestly arguably the highlight of the whole experience. Its radiant sonic textures just circle deep in your ear, and as you encounter more locations and stand against the darkness of the world and listen to the soundscapes that caress your speakers and float around you, you are teleported to the world inside of the game. From the song that plays at the title screen, to the almost upbeat song that plays as you meander throughout some of the upper right-hand caves, the bleak song at the crash site, and honestly the stunning song that plays at the game's small handful of teleportation rooms. There is no shortage of ambient and atmospheric soundscapes that only help Ghost Song's overall presentation. The OST of Ghost Song is an essential part of the experience, and one that helped me immerse myself into the game's world, characters, and story. The story of Ghost Song is pretty minimal, leaning on a Souls-like presentation where a lot of the information is given to you in somewhat cryptic passages by a lot of the game's characters. It implies a lot, tells very little, and bears a lot of seemingly desperate subtext that lies underneath the game's general moody and heavy tone. As you explore the world of Ghost Song, you meet several characters that are all united in the situation that their spaceship has crashed due to a strange magnetic field that's surrounding the very planet that you're on. And as you explore more of the planet, you'll find more ships also careened into the background and destroyed. In what will become a striking division point in its theme, you're not tasked with killing a bunch of bosses that are holding down the static field, allowing the team to break free from the planet, but instead you're tasked to go find ship parts that have been scattered around the planet from all of the other ships that have crashed. The crew of characters that you meet on the surface of the planet in Ghost Song, while not super in-depth, provide a sense of comfort in the harsh world. It's not so often that I play a Metroidvania where the gameplay is obviously so at the forefront that I go out of my way to talk to every single person in the game, learning what makes each one of them tick. Characters like Roper, for instance, a self-described, somewhat lazy person that is forced to overwork himself to make sure that the ship that his crewmates crashed on can be repaired. There's Raven, a sentient AI that throughout the game is creating a new physical body for her AI to be transferred to. Matilda, a scientist who broke both of her legs in the crash and is nearly working herself to death, trying to figure out how to shut down the static field that is hovering above the planet. And Pasha, a small girl that connects with the Deadsuit, almost uncovering the person that potentially lies beneath. The game uses these characters in a way that works well with the game's overall tone. Ghost Song's atmosphere is not only used with the beautiful graphics, the serene music, and the inherent loneliness that the genre of Metroidvanias kind of sorta tend to lean towards, but also the bleak outlook that the whole cast of characters that you meet on the surface have on their situation. They all know that they can get their ship working again, but the same static field that careened their ship down onto this planet will only do the same when they try to leave. They live in this stasis on a planet that they can't survive on, and with dwindling hope that they'll ever see their homes or their families again. There are other characters that you'll meet along your quest, like Mutt and his brother. They are two people that apparently have been living on this planet for what seems like eons. And you meet Mutt deep in the parasitic caves, and he talks about his fervent need to communicate with the bugs by killing them. First by the few, then by the thousands. He speaks of almost a telepathic communication with these creatures, and his brother seems to be unable to pull Mutt out of this obsessive need for communication. But all of this wonderfully ties back to the Deadsuit herself. She's truly an elusive character whose origins and even state of being are always really held into question. At first you think she's a robot, but then it's alluded that there might be someone underneath that armor. But then at some point it makes you doubt that sentiment all over again. Her interactions with all of these characters start really timid, with the Deadsuit hardly interacting much at all and allowing the other characters to essentially talk to her. But as the game progresses and you continue to talk to everybody, she opens up about herself. The things that she does and doesn't do, and the dreams that she tends to have every night. The distant nature of the Deadsuit leaves Ghost Song to be one of the very few games that I've played where it's hard for me to put myself in the protagonist's shoes. When I play games, I become another person. Unlike movies, books, and other art forms, you can only really relate to the characters in those stories up to a certain point. Like a cousin, a friend, a brother, a sister, a mother, a father. But they're not you. In video games, your actions shape that character, and the character becomes a reflection of you. There's a reason underneath a surface level viewpoint as to why when people talk about their gaming experiences with friends, they use the words, "I did this," or "I thought about," or "I didn't do this." Sure, you are the one performing the actions, but that character really is, in a metaphorical sense, you. And the Deadsuit being so distant from the other characters about who she is and the nature of her existence creates this barrier between you and her, because there is no connection between the two of you. You're just in the dark as anyone else about her, because you aren't her. And that distance is exactly the type of feeling that Ghost Song does best. Ghost Song stands on its own as a work of art, evoking a feeling that I feel is synonymous with Metroidvanias as a genre, but it also manages to craft a world and a feeling all its own. There may be some issues that I have with it as a game, but I think all of those issues fall by the wayside when I look at the bigger picture of what is being presented. Matt White should be proud of what he managed to accomplish, and I hope that maybe sometime in the future he can manage a Ghost Song, the final cut. Hey everybody, thank you for being patient. This video was a little bit harder than I thought it would. Turns out writing a review after not writing one for 9 months can be kind of tricky. That on top of the holidays being pretty stressful, and my last month hasn't been the best financial situation, but that's besides the point. I appreciate everybody's patience. December will be another year where I do a 12 days of Itchy Tasty, where I play 12 random itch.io games and tell you what I think about them, so stay tuned for that. And the next video will probably be out before the end of December. Hopefully. Thanks for watching. I love your face. I love your show.
Tomato is a fruit, but it's also a vegetable.